Overview of the business. There are two basic classifications. Take-home businesses, you go into the store, you get your video, your book, your magazine, whatever it is, sex toys, you take them home with you, and those with on-premises entertainment. Gentlemen's clubs, cinemas, video arcades, we'll talk about that. These are very different activities. And think about your zoning ordinance. Does your zoning ordinance allow a bar and a liquor store in exactly the same places? Many communities do not. They're selling the same product, alcoholic beverages. But there are problems that arise at the bar that don't arise at the liquor store. Police get very few calls for fights at liquor stores. They get lots of calls for fights at bars. It goes with the territory. Ideally, that leads to differential treatment of these uses in the zoning ordinance. Now, you may be in a state where the state preempts that and they decide the locations of these businesses. But if you have a choice, you probably treat them differently. And we often suggest that you might treat the take-home and on-premises entertainment sex businesses differently. Take-home businesses. Here are the types of stores that carry sexually oriented media. Mainstream media stores, Barnes & Noble, you will find a good bit of media that fits the definition of sexually oriented media. Stores with back rooms, we'll show you an example of one of those. What we call percentage stores, purely XXX bookstores, sexually oriented media stores, and what we call sex shops. Mainstream media stores. And if you doubt that your Barnes & Noble or other bookstore has this material, let me read you a definition of sexually oriented media. Books, magazines, DVDs, or other media in which the primary emphasis is on specified sexual activities or specified anatomical areas. Specified sexual activities, and this is just part of the definition, but acts of human masturbation, sexual intercourse, sodomy, erotic or sexual stimulation with objects or mechanical devices, sexual intercourse, and so on. This definition shall include apparent sexual stimulation of another person's genitals, whether clothed or unclothed. Specified anatomical areas, any of the following: less than completely and opaquely covered human genitals, pubic area, female areola or nipple, or any combination thereof, male genitals in a discernibly turgid state, even if completely and opaquely covered. Go to the self-help books, the healthcare books, the marriage manuals, some art books, any number of places in a mainstream bookstore you can find this material. So simply saying that any store that carries such material is a sexually oriented business will not work. Then there are stores with back rooms. This was a real store. The sad part of this, is my understanding, is that Mom shot Pop at some point and the store went out of business. But they were in business. It was a nice little store in the downtown area. And here is the actual back room in this, and only adults could go back there, and the sexually oriented material was located there. And that has a different impact on a community. There's nothing about this business that suggests that it's a sexually oriented business. What my friend Connie Cooper and I call percentage stores advertise as sex businesses, but then they present themselves to the community as a non-sexually oriented business. And most communities make the distinction between the two based on the percentage of inventory that is in a particular category. Here is an example of a store. You can see the van that they kept parked out front to make it clear what business they were in. And in this community, if less than 50% of your inventory was not sexually oriented, you were not a sexually oriented business and not subject to those zoning limitations. So I've circled a box of lollipops that's sitting in the store. 50 lollipops in there would offset 50 videos in the back room because they simply counted the inventory. And while that can be very handy if you adopt tough regulations for sexually oriented business and limit them to some areas, then this store can go into other areas and say, we're not a sexually oriented business. One chain of stores that we visited in one community had a weird combination. They had standard mix of sexually oriented products. Then they had old dusty paperback books and old copies of Time magazine and Consumer Reports and stuff. And Beanie Babies. What a great combination. But they were not treated as sexually oriented businesses because they met the percentage mix outlined by the local government. Sexually oriented media stores, the old XXX bookstores, adult bookstores, there aren't a lot of those around anymore, and the ones that still exist are kind of like this. They're not the nicest or most modern stores. I don't think there are a lot of those being opened because we're seeing a lot more sex shops. But before I get to sex shops, let me talk about sex toys. Sex toys are a very popular retail item in sexually oriented businesses. They're often available in sexually oriented media stores. They're a major feature of sex shops that I'm about to talk about. You can also find them in chain drugstores. There's a popular gift shop in malls that carries these items in small quantities. They have absolutely no constitutional protection. The state of Alabama has completely banned the sale of them. There's probably a right to privacy to own them. The case law is interesting, but no right to sell them. But the Food and Drug Administration provides recommended uses for them, and they're a pretty good alternative to unprotected sex for people whose sex lives are. So we're not anti-sex toys, but they don't have any constitutional protection. My friend Connie Cooper and I got very attached to this chain of stores. I think they got us 3 jobs. In one case, they opened right across the street from a Roman Catholic high school. In another, they opened along a walking route to one of the community's major elementary schools. And I've forgotten the third place that we dealt with them. Their emphasis is on really wild lingerie that would embarrass Victoria's Secret, very, very high heel shoes that I can't imagine anybody walking in, some leather goods, some sex toys, and they toss in a little bit of media. And until we came along in these communities, they weren't considered a sexually oriented business, and yet they obviously are. That concludes our introduction to some of the take-home businesses that include sexually oriented material. In the next chapter, we'll talk about some of the businesses with on-premises entertainment.